Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us online from around the world. My name is Eskinder Zaleke, and I serve as the head of the Independent Evaluation Office at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this virtual session of the COP13 Evidence Pavilion, titled Partnering with the Private Sector, Evidence-Based Insight into Mobilizing Investment for Renewable Energy. At COP13 in Belém, the collective focus this year is shifting from commitment to implementation through inclusion, innovation, and renewable and evidence. Today's discussion brings together leaders from EBRD, the Global Renewable Alliance, and the German Institute for Development Evaluation to explore how evaluation and data-driven evidence can unlock private capital, strengthen policy design, and accelerate the global renewable energy transition. We are privileged to have such a distinguished speaker with us today, and I look forward to a rich and engaging discussion that connects evidence with action, and then finally to the impact that we all are looking forward. Let me begin by introducing my distinguished panelists, starting with Dr. Arfa Dinser, a principal evaluator at the EBRD's Independent Evaluation Department. He has led evaluation on private sector operation, climate change, and innovation. And previously, he served as principal economist at the EBRD. Alfar holds a PhD from Columbia University, and he has been widely sought after and published a number of articles on development and inclusion. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Alfar. So my second speaker is Mr. Michael Taylor. He's a senior consultant with the Global Renewable Alliance, bringing over 30 years of experience in energy economics and policy. He previously led Iran's global work on renewable technology, cost and performance, and held a senior analytical role at the International Energy Agency and the UK Department of Trade and Industry and the New Zealand's Minister of Economics and Development. It's a great pleasure to have you with us, Michael. So my final but not least speaker is Mr. Kevin Moll, an evaluator at the German Institute of Development and Evaluation, where he assesses German development corporations in climate and energy, including mitigation, adaptation, access to green energy. He specialized in the theory-based evaluation and evidence synthesis and holds Masters of Science in Environmental and Development from the London School of Economics. So it's an honor to have all those great guest speakers with us today. And we are looking forward to a productive and enlightening discussion. To our audience, please feel free to share your questions in the chat throughout the discussion. We'll address as many possible during the final Q&A session. Without further ado, I will briefly present the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank's recent climate and energy evaluation that we did at the Independent Evaluation Office. More specific focus would be the Turkey, and then we'll move to the panel discussion. Now let's go to the presentation. Mia? Okay, let me share my screen. Sorry, my presentation is loading. Okay. So, okay. AIIB Climate and Energy Project Evaluation. This year in 2025, I think we're trying to share the screen, but for some.
It's kind of the screen is shared. I think you should be able to see it.
We don't see anything, Mia, from the screen. Can you guys see it?
I think everyone can see it.
Really? Okay, let me just go through. So if the screen is okay, follow me. I will do it from my end, okay? So AIB Climate and Energy Project Evaluation. This year we have done 3 major evaluation over $1 billion investment. So the first one we did was the Beijing Air Quality Improvement and the Core Replacement Project. So this project improved air quality and reduced air pollution by replacing coal with natural gas for heating and cooking the rural village Beijing. So it's a project involved $761 million. So it has contributed millions of lives of people to enhance their air quality, emission, and the health aspect. And the second evaluation we did was in India. This is a private sector evaluation, a financial intermediary, Tata Cleantech Sustainable Infrastructure on Lending Facility, mobilizing private capital to support increased supply of renewable energy and generation. Under this project, 16 sub-projects were financed. All of them were renewable solar and wind projects. So it has helped the government of India transition to a low carbon economy. The one that I would be sharing as a case study is the TSK-based Sustainable Energy and Infrastructure on Lending Facility in Turkey. So this project is almost 200 million project. So it's a non-private, non-sovereign operations, but guaranteed by the government of Turkey. So TSKB, it was AIIB's first standalone on lending facility to a bank via 200 million backed financing. So under this scheme, we had 2 geothermal energy and 4 wind power plant and 1 energy efficiency and 1 transitional distribution project. During the evaluation process, we had a site visit to do inspection and a visit on the wind power plant project and one of the energy efficiency project. Overall assessment based on our desk review, available data, stakeholder engagement, interviews the client, and visiting the sub-project. The overall project assessment was rated successful with the sub-rating of highly relevant, consistent with the AIIB's strategic priority on green financing and the government of Turkey and the TSKB itself. And the project was rated effective, which all the objective has been achieved and the amount of renewable energy, both megawatts, and also the outcome were achieved. And the project was also efficient, both on-time delivery, disbursement from AIIB side, and successfully implementing on time and on budget. And also we found the project most likely sustainable. Both on sustainability deal with 3 aspects: financial sustainability, and also environmental and social sustainability, and the client sustainability. And the client work quality also was rated highly satisfactory. This was a client which has years of experience working with the World Bank, the Asia Infrastructure Bank, and the IFC and the EBRD. And the AIIB work quality itself was rated satisfactory. What are the key lessons we really captured across all these 3 projects or programs across multiple diverse regions? I think lesson number 1, evidence matters. Robust result measurement framework and verifiable result attract investors' confidence. Output by itself is not enough. For X megawatt of power generated, and then what? How much was the rural electrification, the economic impact has this project? So a very robust RMF really helped to enhance the quality and the implementation of all those projects in different regions. The second lesson, we have identified blended finance and partnership can ally public and private incentive to de-risk investment. The experience in Turkey, that's what it tells us. The client was an investment bank, absolutely non-sovereign, but the government of Turkey de-risked and took the guarantee. The capacity and the governance of intermediary are crucial. A strong environmental, social, and governance structure, not only at a corporate level, but mainstreamed across all those sub-projects, environmental management system, grievance redress mechanism, and also tracking all the greenhouse gas emission and the credit screening process to drive both financial and climate result. Policy alignment, clear national renewable energy target, and predictable regulatory enhanced private sector engagement. When there is also clear direction and policy framework, that's also an incentive for private sector to play. Some of the challenge in mobilizing private capital is perceived investment risk. That's one of the big issues we found. The second one was high upfront capital because renewable energy normally demand huge cost. And the fragmented regulatory and institutional framework also could be sometimes a bottleneck. And the misalignment between public incentive and the private sector needs. But still, there are huge opportunities also that exist in mobilizing private capital for renewable energy. Number one, evidence-based policy and evaluation can make a difference. Innovative financial instrument, like the one AIIB has, for example, the climate-based policy finance, which is a policy-based lending, which has three layers. First, helping regional member country at upstream, setting up policy framework, and also financing downstream renewable energy project. And the growing investors' appetite for sustainability, that's also very important opportunity that we found. Technology cost used to be an issue in the past, but now with a number of emerging technology, both the renewable front, I think the pricing was becoming very competitive and it clearly can be affordable. So the final opportunity is partnership and knowledge sharing. So with this, I will move now to my distinguished panelists. I think it could be very natural transition. Let me start with you, Alper. Given your huge experience with EBRD, both in the climate and the economic front, and you have done a number of evaluations, given your background as both an economist and as an evaluator, how can evidence better inform and the balance between financial return and the development impact in the clean energy project, particularly when engaging the private sector? Over to you, Alper.
Iskandar, thank you very much. I sincerely appreciate this opportunity, and I listened to your presentation with great interest. Indeed, we also do similar projects at EBRD, these on-landing facilities. It's one element I think that is particularly important is for us to be able to measure system-wide effects that goes beyond project boundaries. By the way, I hope you hear me well. So it is, and then I think
I do hear you.
This is a significant challenge. Indeed, it is one of the most significant gaps in current evidence. It is very difficult to capture these system-wide effects, both positive and negative, that extends beyond boundaries of individual projects. And indeed, this is what we would like to change. We would like to change how our partner banks change their own behavior, and then how they act even in the absence of our own interventions. Recently, we developed a bespoke method to measure that. We are also working with now more than 130 partner banks under several frameworks that we have. And then what we did was we screened 400 annual reports from 50 partner banks that we have. And then we try to understand, do they present them differently in terms of their own climate lending or green lending or sustainable lending when they do deals with SMEs? And then looking at those annual reports with semantic search, indeed, in certain cases, we identified that they started to represent themselves differently. Even in the absence of EBRD, they say that they develop new products in that space for green lending, climate lending for SMEs, and then they expand the market. So then with certain confidence, we were also able to identify the contribution of EBRD or other MDBs in that case. So obviously this is a success, but at the same time, it is important for us to find ways to develop such tools at scale and then applying it consistently in evaluations. And then at this point in time, although there's large language models or more broadly artificial intelligence, it helps us to do that, but it requires much more work. And I think this is, without making that big step, I think we are limited about our capacity to inform more broadly this type of work. The other point that I would like to make is, and you also made that, about de-risking. In that case, TSKB, you highlighted the importance of de-risking. One thing is that another critical piece of evidence that is often missing is the true cost of de-risking. How much concessionality or grant support is required to mobilize private investment, and how this affects the balance that you mentioned between financial and development outcomes. In our analysis of those on-landing facilities that I've mentioned, we observed that in time, indeed, grant intensity, concessionality, it is increasing over time. And then this leads to contradictory trends. One thing is that we are able to see that market players, such as our partner banks, they adopt new products. At the same time, we expect this grant intensity concessionality to decrease, but it is not decreasing. So it is, in that sense, it is, we need to explain that contradiction, in my opinion, and then that requires much better data in terms of concessionality, cost of de-risking. But at the same time, what we see is that our findings was that they tentatively suggest that this is partly because for certain products such as on-lending, blended finance mostly, the supply of available grants, they also influence grant intensity. So, and then this is for this reason, I believe this really masks the underlying market dynamics, and it makes it harder for us to assess the real price of the risking. On that front, I think if we can fill in these two gaps, essentially, one, how do we consistently assess system-wide effects, and then how we can be better in terms of understanding efficiency in terms of de-risking and cost of de-risking. If we can fill in those gaps, I think that will really inform much better mobilizing investment for renewable energy. And then here I stopped. I believe I have already spoken too much.
Thank you very much, Alprami. You have touched the most critical aspect of it, right? A systemic evaluation and how to really capture effectiveness. I mean, concessionality is the most critical aspect of all this renewable market, and especially the tools, the market, how do you really vis-a-vis de-risking? I mean, those also some of consistent issue we really identified in our evaluation. Thank you very much. Now, let me move to my second question to our second speaker. It's a very different lens, right? From the Global Energy Alliance, Michael. So Michael, given your experience in the policy upfronts, you have spent years analyzing the cost and the performance of renewable technology. How can this type of evidence be better integrated to help investors and policymakers identify the most cost-effective pathway for accelerating the energy transition through investment and a policy decision? Over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Eskinder, and to everyone, welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with you, representing the Global Renewable Alliance. I'm their senior consultant on energy financing. So for those that you don't know, the Global Renewables Alliance, we're bring together the key renewable industry associations, so the Global Wind Energy Council, Global Solar Council, Green Hydrogen Organization, Long Duration Energy Storage Council, International Hydropower Association, and the International Geothermal Association. So we bring a deep industry expertise and insight to our shared mission, which is accelerating a clean energy transition. So we're really delighted to be here today, because at the core of that is, this group of industry associations has a collective voice that really wants to advance an evidence-based approach to policy setting, and in particular achieving our shared goals around the tripling of renewable power by 2030. So it's great to be a part of this discussion. I'm going to bring it up a little level compared to the discussion of individual project level evaluation and so on, and talk about what's happening in the sector. But before I do that, it's perhaps useful just to reflect on what I learned when I was working with the International Renewable Energy Agency, developing, transparent data on the cost and performance of renewable power. So there's a number of benefits when you ensure that you have a strong evidence base for all of your policies. And I particularly enjoyed ALPA's insistence on us improving our understanding of the cost of concessionality, a really great research area for us. But when we go for an evidence-based approach, we come up with, so tracking renewable power generation costs, we had some powerful messaging right around the economics and the competitiveness of renewables, with the cost of electricity from solar PV, for instance, falling 90% since 2010, on that of onshore wind by 70% over the same time period. So to a point where they were undercutting fossil fuels on a levelized cost of electricity basis. But there's a couple of other important things we do when we do that kind of analysis and have that evidence base. It helps to reduce uncertainty. So policymakers and all stakeholders better understand the underlying evidence base, the costs. That allows for a more informed debate of the role of renewable power in the energy transition. And this can help underpin greater ambition and also, accelerate the cycle of policy deployment, because we have a factual basis for our starting point. We're not speculating. So the power of data shouldn't be underestimated. The second point is that it allows better benchmarking, right? So there's two elements to that are probably useful. One, it highlights opportunities and challenges. So when you look at individual markets, you can then see, again, find further research questions. Are there structural issues that are going to have higher costs, on a kind of permanent basis, or are there areas where policy levers could work to drive down costs? So really important opportunities, just a couple of points to perhaps highlight. The first one in particular, really important at the macro level, accelerating ambition. So today we've actually released a report, which I helped write, on the financing the tripling goal. And so what we've done, the novel aspect of this work is what we've done we've gone in and calculated the debt and equity needs by country and technology for the tripling goal, which we're unfortunately still not on track to achieve. We did this by translating investment needs in 1.5 degrees C scenarios into debt and equity, with a project database of around 4,000 debt to equity ratios for renewable power generation projects around the world. What we find is the tripling goal sees project developers needing to mobilize 2.4 trillion in equity by 2030 and 6.2 trillion in debt over the period 2024 to 30, so 6 years. We're way off being able to do this. So essentially more than a doubling of the annual financial flows to renewable projects, which IRENA identified as around 630 billion last year. So with risk return profiles differing by project, country, and technology, the call on debt and equity providers matters hugely to the availability of finance, but also to the cost. Right, so having this more granular understanding at a country level or a regional level is really important, because, for instance, in emerging market and developing economies, excluding China, last year they received 17% of all renewable power generation investment. It needs to be over 40%, but at a higher level. So they actually have to see the increased financing flows that are 6 times 2024 levels if we're going to meet the tripling renewable power goal and achieve a just energy transition at the same time, not leaving these countries behind. But at the same time, these EMDEs are some that have the most difficulty in accessing finance, and at the same time, the cost of finance they faced is also very high, 2 to 5 times higher than in the OECD, and we highlight this in the report. So this granular data on what's required, we're hoping is allowing a process from now that can help focus stakeholder discussions. So this type of session that you've organized here, Eskinder, is really important, because we need this trialogue of discussion between industry, policymakers, and the financial community. So we get the policy and regulatory frameworks to provide investor certainty, equitably share risks, so we get de-risking and low cost to consumers, and Alpa already mentioned that. We leverage scarce public finance more effectively, right? So you've already talked, Eskinder, about the importance of blended finance, enabling better leveraging of public finance. So crucial at this time. The other element, of course, is that, you know, in an ideal world, we should really have a new definition, more comprehensive definition of risk that takes into account social and environmental factors, not just economic ones. Then we'd get a better appraisal of the project level risks, particularly in emerging market and developing economies, many of which are going to be disproportionately negatively impacted by climate change costs if we don't act soon. So that's a very quick overview, and delighted to engage more with questions from the group after everyone's had a chance to speak.
Wow, Michael, I mean, thank you so very much. I mean, very insightful. I look forward reading the report that's just released today. I mean, you have really touched a lots of issues that we have been dealing with as an MDB, from the financial side, private sector intervention, and also some of our regional member countries. I mean, the cost of constitutionality, that's really very powerful. You know, who knows, that's a problem. You know, that's what, when we say evidence-driven climate finance, can have a very meaningful discussion. Market competitiveness, that's also one of the most really serious arguments. How can you push the renewable energy agenda forward when it's bankable? And the benchmarking also, I can't agree with you more. I don't know where these trillions of dollars will come, but let's finger crossed, right? We'll get there. Now, let's move to our third speaker, Kevin. Very interesting analysis again. We'll look at from Kevin. Kevin, your evaluation at Devil examine how the German Development Corporation mobilized private capital for climate mitigation. What were your main findings? What have you found to be the main barrier to increase private sector participation? As you have heard from Michael, there is a lot of challenge and opportunity. Over to you, Kevin.
Eskinder, thank you very much. Thank you for the question. Hi, everybody. Greetings from COP in Berlin. It's very hot right now and much hotter than in Germany. Thank you for having me here. So I think the answer to your question, like you mentioned, Eskinder, lies in our recent evaluation that we did, looking at mitigation and specifically on the effectiveness of private capital mobilization of German Development Corporation. And we wanted to understand whether mobilizing private capital for mitigation interventions works better compared to other sectors. So like you mentioned, private capital is becoming increasingly important for achieving the climate targets and also the broader sustainable development goals. So we need to capitalize on more market opportunities and innovation potential. So our main finding is that mobilization of private capital really fails to meet the expectations. So we really expected that private capital mobilization, particularly in renewable energy mitigation, would be higher than in other sectors, but actually that is not the case. So looking at a time span of 6 years from 2017 to 2023, Germany mobilized 137 million in private capital through the use of public funds in the area of mitigation. And then comparing that with the relative proportions in other sectors, it's really not more successful than in other sectors. And we were really surprised by this because we understand that there would be a strong interest among private investors, particularly in the energy sector and mitigation sector. And then we tried to dig into the reasons a little bit. And one reason for this finding could be that many energy systems are partially or at least partially state managed, and it could be a sector that is opening up more slowly than other sectors to private capital, particularly in emerging markets. So in short, although private capital mobilization is essential, we see that it really falls short on what Germany, I think, had planned for mobilizing private capital. Now, onto the second part of your question, in terms of the barriers, we tried to dig into a little bit, what are the challenges? And you mentioned some of them, actually all three of you, Eskinder, Alper, and Michael. So it's really about the investment risk and the high perceived investment risks and costs in emerging markets and developing economies, but also the enabling conditions we feel are quite weak, and that the regulatory and institutional frameworks are also largely missing. So for one, there's quite a weak investor appetite in particularly developing countries. We know that foreign direct investments are declining, have been declining in the past year. and these weak enabling conditions. So we would expect that these are very much a barrier because national public and development banks are often missing. Local investors are also often missing. And we really don't see a coordinated donor strategy for mobilizing private capital. So I think there is a lot that could be done there. So really, in short, high perceived investment risk and costs, but also weak enabling conditions in terms of the regulatory institutional frameworks are strong barriers to mobilizing private capital in this area. And with that, back to you, Eskinder.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. I mean, it's very interesting. Even in Germany, you know, the debate most of the time was much of the funding is going to mitigation than adaptation, right? Even this argument is not holding water. Per your own evidence from 2017 to 2023, only 170 billion in Germany. Even imagine one of the most advanced technology, and actually the pioneer of the renewable energy was first started in Germany, but still there is a long way to go. I mean, in the private sector, I think that's what, I mean, sometimes really frustrates me on the whole this climate finance discussion. As you heard from Michael, we are talking about trillions, right? But are we even achieving billions first, especially the emerging market? I know the barriers are huge. As you have rightly found out, most of the utilities, especially in the emerging markets, are owned by government, and most of them are subsidized. So the energy tariff is not compatible for private sector to go and play. But whatever, I think that's why I think as an independent evaluator, our role would be much more important than ever to outline some of the issue you, Michael, Alper has outlined, myself, to evidence-driven, what's next need to be done. So thank you very much, all of you. I think with this, we'll go to the second round of questions, which I have one question for all of you. Then we can open for Q&A session. If we have one more extra time, maybe I will ask you a second question, but let's have common question, right? Now, I think we have heard from all of us, there is a challenge. There is also an opportunity. But given all this, what would you like to see MDBs, governments, and the private sectors do differently to align financing flow with evidence-based renewable energy target? Because from all those government, private sector, investor, what do we really need to do differently? Let me start off with Michael, then Kevin, and then Alper. Just okay, Michael, over to you.
Yeah. So I think the first point you make is also a very good one, right? And are we even seeing billions of public funds flowing into mitigation? And so I think the Climate Policy Initiative and their Climate Finance Landscape Report does drill down into this. And in terms of the actual funds going into renewable power generation projects globally, the public funds, it's a very small percentage. I think from memory, it turns out to be in the under 50 billion a year range. My mind is saying it's around 25 billion, but I don't remember the number exactly. So of all of the climate finance, public climate finance that's flowing through to all of these priorities, across mitigation and adaptation, we're actually seeing a relatively small amount go into renewable projects, which and we can talk about other energy efficiency is also important as well, which does receive money, and electrification and energy access. It's all important priorities. So given the scarcity, we talked about, Alper talked about what does it cost, right, for the concessionality. We have to be, what we'd like to see from MDBs and indeed their donors and funders is more of a focus on the priorities of mitigation. So that may require finding other sources of funds, but now is the time to do it, right? So if we can look at, levies on carbon, on frequent flyers, whatever the, it's often a second best policy response, but we really need more public capital to help these EMDEs see their energy transition accelerate and get them the energy they need that actually to see the growth and social outcomes that they need, not just mitigate climate, right? So using the public funds more efficiently, so understanding those costs for concessionality, getting more blended finance or more innovative financial tools there that can leverage more private capital. You know, we heard from Kevin that it's not been so successful in that respect in terms of the ratio. So there's also some work to do there. And I hear very much the point about the state-owned and the frameworks, if you like, the conducive frameworks not being there for the capital to flow. So that's the other issue that needs to be addressed. We need to see more investment in early stage project development. So potentially more public funds going into equity or first lost, so that we can get a greater project, you know, a larger project pipeline of bankable products coming through. Because the other issue we have is often with MDBs, unfortunately, is that the timeline for actually to approving projects and dispersing is too long, and it frustrates everyone, right? So that has to be addressed. You know, maybe that's a structural, maybe there's a structural solution to that, moving to instruments that are actually easier to use, whether that's insurance schemes for de-risking or other options, right? So there's several elements, I guess 3 overall, where there really needs to be this action, right? In terms of ideally increasing the flow of funds, and that may mean finding other sources for, to strengthen MDB balance sheet, understanding where they may have more flexibility within their balance sheet as well, within their existing, obviously constraints, helping with those early stage investments and de-risking the blended finance to get more leverage from the scarce public resources, and then speeding things up because we're running out of time.
Thank you very much, Michael, again. I mean, you are absolutely right. I mean, at least from MDB side, where we are, disbursement bureaucracy, I think, need to be softened. I fully agree. I think the most important part in the renewable energy, access to capital. There is huge gap between what is needed and what the financing available on the market. But for me, I have spent most of my career with the IFC in Washington, but recently joined AIIB. I think AIIB is a good example. Where they have is lean, clean, and green. That's our motto now. So the processing part, I think what AIIB really smartly did was the processing of all this. It used to take years in the World Bank because people can frustrate, market change, the cost variations. So streamlining approach is very, very important. And the flow of funding. And also one important thing, especially if we have to push it to emerging market, bankable project demands advisory and also technical assistance for project preparation. That's also something we really need to think about. Okay, then Kevin, over to you.
Thank you, Eskinder. So I think from an evaluator's perspective, because we're from an evaluation institute, there's really a big need and opportunity for this evidence-based policy making. I think you touched upon that, Eskinder, as well as you, Michael. So it's really necessary to understand where public funds can have the highest leverage effects in terms of mobilization, and what are the necessary and supporting conditions. And also understanding whether specific fund structures could be maybe more effective than others, particularly in the area of mitigation. So we don't have all the answers yet, but I think most of us are working on answering these questions still. And then from a donor perspective, both bilaterally and multilaterally, like I mentioned, I think it will be very essential to strengthen the enabling conditions for private capital investments, the institutional frameworks. National development banks could be more supported, kind of southern-led regional development banks, perhaps, so more kind of establishing local structures. And this is likely to make private investments more likely, but also cheaper. And then secondly, and you both, I think, also touched on this, Michael and Eskinder, from a donor perspective, it's really necessary to align the private capital investments with really the stated needs of the recipient countries. And, we have these NDCs, these nationally determined contributions that recipient countries formulate every few years. Maybe we should look more into that to see how we can better align donor funding with these stated priorities. And with that, back to you, Eskinder.
I'm muted. So thank you so much. Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, as from your own evaluation, as you have really pointed out, we need a very pragmatic evaluation itself, right? Driven by data and the recommendations that can be really implemented, and especially private sector can appreciate to mobilize financing and also to track. Alfred, over to you.
I mean, I would like to go on from where Kevin left. It is he mentioned that we will have this evaluation perspective, and yes, that's my point of view as well. And then you also in your presentation highlighted that how evaluation can inform action. It's there. I think the availability of data and transparency of data is fundamental. First to do evaluation and then to credibly inform decision making, I believe. And then it's thinking about what we have talked today about, especially about like risk perception or perceived risk and then credit risk in developing markets. So what we know is that, so for instance, MDBs collaborated and developed the Global Emerging Markets Risk Database. That started in 2009. I think it's like formalized in early 2010s. It's a joint initiative of major MDBs and development finance institutions, and especially it's a huge database of historical credit risk data on private and sub-sovereign projects. And that data itself, it contains default and recoveries on loans, guarantees, equity investments, exposure characteristics like country, instrument type, maturity, currency, and it is available like as a time series. And now it is, maybe you have seen in the news now, credit rating agencies looking at that data, they say that indeed private investors should assume much more risk with should be able to deploy much more capital given risk profile based on this database. So it is, I think that data itself, indeed, it has potential to inform private actors. And then this is why bringing that data is fundamentally important. We don't have like similar data about concessionality. So we only have piecemeal data sets. So, and then we don't have deal level data about how much grants goes into those on lending deals, for instance, or like other type of investment. So I think essentially producing that type of data and then sharing it with market will be fundamentally like the influential. But having said that, the GEM database, for instance, for us to develop it and then to put it out, it took more than 15 years. So do we have such time given like the climate crisis? So here I stop. Thank you.
Very much. I think I will opt to open for the Q&A discussion. We have a couple of questions, but before that, I really want to follow up with one question with Michael, and then I will open it to three of you can reflect, right? Michael, I haven't read your report, but it seems very interesting. From your report, what kind of enabling conditions, whether policy, regulatory, or financial, have you seen makes the biggest difference in mobilizing private investment for climate and energy? So three of you also can touch upon what kind of evidence, like which one would really have significance, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I think it's not rocket science, but it is difficult to do, unfortunately. So where we've seen the most traction, and we have to also talk a little bit about perhaps, what happened pre 2022 and post 2022 as well, because I think the world has changed quite a bit. But the challenge has always been to approach the rollout in a holistic way. So in a way that takes an whole energy sector view. So 10 years, 15 years ago, policy was very much focused on, individual silos of policy support for individual technologies to drive down costs, right? We did that, and it worked faster than most countries had really anticipated. So in some ways, they didn't believe quite how successful they would be. And so now we're in a position where we often lacking the holistic energy sector view for higher shares of renewables, particularly variable renewable penetration. right? So what we're seeing now is that the most success is happening where we're having policies and regulatory frameworks that have anticipated or moved with the change in the reality on the ground, where, you know, the cheapest new source of electricity in most places is renewable. So that means that we've got the right regulatory framework and market trading arrangements in the electricity markets, ones that properly have addressed the issues around ancillary services and open and transparent procurement of those services. At the same time, because of the lead time for the electricity grid is longer than for renewable power projects, particularly solar PV, we've had to, you know, the countries which are coping best are the ones that have policies that allow that lag in investment in electricity systems to be managed through perhaps through nodal pricing, you know, the growth in the economics of battery storage now to help address that, so that we can catch up a little bit in terms of the electricity grid investment, both at a transmission level and a distribution level. And, you know, what we're now seeing is that we're also missing one final piece of the puzzle, which is the supporting policies to drive electrification, right? So that's the next big hurdle potentially to the rollout for renewable policies. So essentially what we need is a very holistic approach. It has to be joined up. It has to cover not just individual technology support, but the market integration and regulation, market design. And there are, you know, there's no one way to do this right. So that's the other thing that's important. You know, at a country level, a lot depends on the existing institutional frameworks and regulatory capacities. So, you know, you're not starting from a blank slate. This can be done successfully in different ways, but it is beholden to stakeholders now to really take a very holistic approach to it and think 5-10 years ahead, particularly these days.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we have 14 minutes left, and we have a couple of interesting questions from the audience. Without further ado, let me move to those questions. I'll read it loud. Would you be able to see all the questions? You all can see it, right? I don't have to read it. Excellent. So let's start with the first question about the geopolitics, right? And the second one is specifically addressed to Kevin and Michael. So how do the bottom line is, how do you really factor in the geopolitical uncertainty when we do all our risk analysis in renewable energy? Particularly I think the audience asked about FCS, fragile and conflict states, that into context, right? I think, to me, let me just briefly reflect. I think there is no more important time we live in now than ever, how the geopolitical circumstance can affect all our business, right? Which we never anticipated, from specific to our interest, from linked to evaluation. That's something also even us in my institution, we are taking very serious into consideration, right? What would happen? We don't know. Even now, you see, the world is moving more from the multilateralism, more protectionism, right? So how is this going to affect the implementation of all this renewable energy project on the ground? That is something we are taking very serious. And also access to capital, as you rightly said, having a bankable project, the need for technical assistance, the need for advisory service, the need for more concessional financing, especially the emerging and AIIB countries are very, very important. So over to you. Any one of you can start reflecting. Alper, can I start with you? How the geopolitical and security-related risk analysis may be specific to renewable energy? If you can reflect, then I can move to Michael and Kevin. Then also we have one more question for Michael and Kevin. Over to you.
I mean, it's Iskandar, it's at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, we typically invest in middle income or higher regions. So this question itself, it's really applicability to EBRD is let's say it's marginal. Still,
it's a bit of a stretch, yeah.
Yeah, still though it is one thing is that what I would say is, I mean, obviously there is this mega system in place, and then it offers like the certain insurance for political risk. So this is one element, and then through that, obviously, we have some, let's say, price discovery is to a certain extent on that end is possible, and then there is all that information is obviously incorporated into our own risk assessment. But in practice, what we see in evaluation is that the first thing is the presence of EBRD is typically perceived as some kind of like a buffer to mitigate that risk, and then this is very much valued. The other thing is that the on the ground presence is another very important factor that helps us to mitigate first risk, but also monitoring of risk. So but unfortunately beyond that, this is something that really goes beyond my expertise.
Excellent. No problem. I mean, you really touched upon it. So Michael or Kevin, if you want to reflect, otherwise you can go to your own questions that
Well,
audience.
perhaps just very quickly, in terms of, in the current situation where we have heightened, I guess, geopolitical and energy security related issues. I mean, I just point to the fact that, wind and solar are very distributed energy resources that provide a lot of redundancy relative to centralized large power stations and grid infrastructure. So, there is, if you like, an opportunity potentially for renewable energy power in particular to provide more resilience in the face of some of these geopolitical uncertainties. Again, once they're purchased and installed, there are no fuel requirements to run them. So if international trade is disrupted, production continues. You can't increase your generation at that point. Well, you can effectively, because there is actually quite a lot of stock of these technologies now in warehouses, particularly PV. But so the risk profile is entirely different, and it does provide additional resiliency. So I'll just make that point, and because I know we're running out of time.
Okay, excellent. Kevin?
Yes, just to add to that. So I think we need more comprehensive risk assessments. And this touches on your point, Michael, that we need to look at beyond the economic risks. Currency fluctuations, perhaps offering, private capital funds also in local currencies. And really, when we think about energy, one central topic is just transitions. And this just transition to renewable energies, there will be winners and losers in the short term. So I think these are risks that projects have to consider, and specifically private investments, when there are people who may be left behind by that investment if it's in renewable energies, for example. So that I know is a very central topic, for example, for German Development Corporation with the Just Energy Transition Partnerships. So I have a more comprehensive concept of risk, but also a comprehensive risk assessments. Yes.
Okay, excellent. I think there are a couple of very interesting questions, right? Especially Victor. He was saying, how do you really move all these multiple pieces, right? Upstream, downstream, and anything in between. Let me give you a very good example, Victor, what we do. Yesterday, we approved 1 billion, the first climate-based policy finance. I would really encourage you to go to AIIB's website to read more about the CPBF, the climate-based policy finance, which exactly answer your question. How do we make sure countries and also more emerging market could have the regulatory framework at upstream policy level, which can really develop, we can help them. And then also downstream level, we can identify renewable energy projects that we can finance. And in between, we can play also catalytic role, like by green bond, blue bond, all those investment instruments, bringing everything, all the three players, right? Upstream, there is a government regulatory policy framework helping them a clear transition and roadmap that can really understood by private sector players. And then in between, helping also private sector to come and invest in, helping them also access to capital. And the downstream, as part of this package, also enabling to invest on many of the renewable energy projects. I think this is a very good model that AIIB is leading among the MDBs. World Bank has policy-based lending, which normally goes to, the bigger packet of the Minister of Finance. But this is more focused on renewable energy and green transition to low-carbon economy. I think that's a very good blend. I fully agree with, because if we think in isolation, that's the biggest problem we have. because you need to really, if you want to go to emerging market where there is no even policy, regulatory framework, tariff issue that we spoke about, would have significant issue to deal with. And Eric, given the limited pool of, I mean, this is also an issue. I think we all touched upon it. When there is a limited blended finance, what role private sector capital mobilization would play a very, very strong instrument. I think that's also very good point. Is there any other question left? Kevin, there's one question I think for you. In your finding, what role did concessionality play mobilizing the private capital? Did you have any sense of ratio? If you want to reflect on that, I think you already touched upon it, but do you want to more elaborate on that, or if you okay?
Yes, sure. Just one sentence, Iskender.
Yeah,
so
please.
concessionality actually plays a very big role. So we saw that different kinds of funds, like for example, guarantees and structured funds, can absorb the political, economic, performance, currency risks differently than other kinds of instruments, like layered tranches of risks between different kinds of investors. So I think you can customize the kinds of funds that developing cooperation offers in a more nuanced way, and their concessionality plays a very central role in that. Yeah. Thank you, Will, for the question.
Okay, excellent. So last question, briefly. So if you want to touch upon, we have touched, what type of evidence? We talked a lot about evidence, right? Economic, social, or technological are most convincing to private investor when it came to climate and energy and investment. Which one really would play the turning point? The economic, social, or technological evidence when we do our evaluation? All of them are equally important. Just one sentence reflection. Who wanna go first? Alper.
I mean, as of today, obviously, economic evidence is by a very large margin, I guess, the most dominant one. It is, I think, in the first round, Michael briefly mentioned that how we think about risk, and then what should be the dimensions of risk. Actually, without we have seeing such like an expansion of definition of risk, and then application of those expanded definition into actual investment decision making, I don't think that this will change. It's yeah, but it's as I don't want to be cynical, obviously. Here I stand.
No problem. Okay. Michael?
Yeah, no, I mean, I have to agree again, economics, right? And we're seeing essentially, in real time, the evidence of that, that compelling case now, right? You see the surge in imports of solar PV panels in Pakistan and Africa, parts of Africa as well, right? So I just add a nuance that the economic argument stems from the fact in some ways we've solved the technical one, right? So they're kind of embedded. So just to add a slight nuance
I think
to that response.
Yeah, Kevin?
Yeah, so besides the economic risk, I completely agree. We need to consider the political risk as well. I think there needs to be an openness in terms of receiving technical and financial support between donors and recipient countries, and that needs to continue to be an open line, both for conversation, but also actual interventions for development cooperation to continue and playing a central role where the capacities are not in place yet in developing countries. So I think there's a political risk aspect as well.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much. I fully agree too. The economics is unavoidable, right? I mean, if it's not bankable rate of return, no matter what you do, especially when it came to private sector mobilization, that's the most pragmatic and important. But also technology is extremely important too. I think to me, even the way things are, I don't know if those countries which are not able to catch up, look the country I live in now, in Beijing, China, you have seen how digitalization completely transformed the country, right? The involving of AI, not only digitalization from AI angle, from a very practical energy efficiency, for example, for utility companies, right? Regulatory framework. So I think technology also have significant impact to play equally as the economy, especially in the emerging markets, right? I think we are good. We are coming to an end. Let me just wrap up our discussion today. I think our panel explored how independent evaluation really strengthens the bridge between policy, finance, and the impact, ensuring that every climate dollar deliver measurable result. I think that was the ultimate purpose of this session today. How each dollar, value for dollar. And my key takeaway is three. One, evidence matter. Evidence helps multilateral development bank, the government move faster and smarter, ensuring that each dollar mobilized achieve measurable climate outcome. That's where we can really add a difference as an independent evaluators. And then number two, partnership amplify impact. Collaboration across MDB, government, and private actors is a key to unlock capital. When there is especially the blended finance, public capital is becoming shrinking now. That's why the coordination between MDBs and private sector capital is extremely important. And I think my last takeaway is also learning fuel innovation. Continuous learning from what works and what doesn't enhance the effectiveness for green investment. We have touched a lots of important issues, right? De-risking, conditionality, and concessionality, and all this important. I think we are right on time. So our viewers online, we are very much grateful that you joined and asking us also very exciting questions. For my distinguished panelists, thank you so much for your input was very, very instrumental. So again, we have ended our session. Kevin, I wish you all the best in Belém. So all of you also, thank you so much on the behalf of Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. Thank you so much.